Here's a question that breaks most people's brains. What if government debt doesn't matter? What if countries that control their own currency can never run out of money? What if we've been worried about deficits for nothing? Sounds insane, right? Like economic flat earth theory. But there's a growing group of economists, some at prestigious universities, some advising politicians, who say this is exactly true. They call it modern monetary theory, or MMT. Their claim, everything you've been told about government debt, deficits, and money is wrong. Governments don't need to balance budgets. They can print money to pay for healthcare, education, infrastructure, anything, without consequences. Too good to be true? Mainstream economists think so. They call it voodoo economics and a recipe for hyperinflation. But what if MMT is right? What if we've been constraining ourselves unnecessarily for decades? Today, we're diving into the most controversial economic theory of our time. We'll understand what it actually says, why it's exploding in popularity, and whether it's a revolutionary breakthrough or a dangerous delusion. Because if MMT is right, it changes everything. And if it's wrong, well, countries experimenting with it might learn that lesson the hard way. Let's start with what modern monetary theory actually claims, not the strawman version critics attack. The core MMT principles. Principle 1. Currency issuing governments can't run out of money. If you control your own currency, like the US, Japan, UK, you can always create more of it. You literally cannot go bankrupt in your own currency. Think about it. Can the US run out of dollars? No. The Federal Reserve can create them. Can Japan run out of yen? No. The Bank of Japan creates them. Can Zimbabwe run out of Zimbabwe dollars? Well, that's complicated. We'll get to that. MMT says the federal government isn't like a household. When you run out of money, you can't make more. But governments that issue currency can. Principle 2. Taxes don't fund government spending. This breaks people's brains, but MMT argues the sequence backwards from what you think. Government spends money into existence, pays for programs. This creates money in the economy. Then government taxes some back to control inflation and create demand for currency. Taxes don't fill government coffers so they can spend. Government spending creates the money that taxes then remove. Principle 3. The real constraint is inflation, not debt. MMT says, forget about deficit numbers. The only question is there inflation? If there's no inflation, the government can spend more. If there's inflation, the government should spend less or tax more. The deficit number itself is irrelevant. Principle 4. Unemployment is a political choice. If the government can create money and the only constraint is inflation, then unemployment is a choice. The
government could always create a job guarantee program, hire anyone who wants work. MMT conclusion? We've been needlessly limiting ourselves. We could have universal healthcare, free education, massive infrastructure programs, all without paying for it in the traditional sense. Mainstream economics response? This is insane. Let's examine both sides. Here's the strongest case for MMT and why it's gaining traction. Evidence point 1. Look at what actually happens. Japan has run massive deficits for 30 years. Debt to GDP, 236%, highest in developed world. Government spending, financed by central bank. Result? No crisis, no hyperinflation, interest rates near zero. MMT says, see, the debt doomsayers were wrong. Japan proves governments with their own currency can spend freely. The US, during COVID, printed $5 trillion in 18 months.
Deficit exploded to $3.1 trillion. Mainstream economists predicted disaster. Result? Economy recovered. Inflation came later and from different sources. MMT says, the economy needed that money. We proved government spending works. Evidence point 2. The historical record. World War II. U.S. debt hit 119% of GDP. Government spending was 40% of economy. Did the U.S. collapse? No. The spending won the war and launched the greatest economic boom in history. MMT says, when the U.S. needed to fight World War II, nobody asked, how will we pay for it? They just spent. Because the real resources existed. Factories, workers, materials. Money was just the coordinating mechanism. Evidence point 3. How money actually works. The uncomfortable truth mainstream economics avoids: when banks make loans, they create money. Your $300,000 mortgage? The bank didn't have that sitting in a vault. They created it with a keyboard entry. If private banks create money from nothing, why can't governments? MMT says, governments already do this. We just pretend they don't because of outdated gold standard thinking. Evidence point 4. The inflation argument holds up. MMT predicted correctly. In 2010 to 2019, massive government deficits didn't cause inflation, as MMT said. In 2021 to 2022, inflation came from supply shocks and energy prices, as MMT explained. Countries with currency sovereignty maintain stability, as MMT predicted. The policy implications are massive. If MMT is right, we've been denying people healthcare because we can't afford it, education because deficit concerns, infrastructure because debt
Is too high. Climate action, because it costs too much. All unnecessarily. The resources exist. The workers exist. We just refused to create the money to coordinate them. Case study: the Green New Deal. Cost $10 trillion over 10 years. Traditional view: impossible. We can't afford it. MMT view: can we build it physically? Do we have workers and materials? If yes, we can afford it. Money is not the constraint. Now let's hear why 95% of economists think MMT is dangerous nonsense. Critique 1. Inflation doesn't work like MMT claims. Mainstream argument. MMT says just watch inflation and adjust. But inflation has long lags. By the time you see inflation, it's too late. It's like steering a ship that responds 6 months after you turn the wheel. Real example, 1970s. US government spent heavily. Inflation didn't appear immediately. When it hit, it was brutal. 14% by 1980. Took a decade and massive unemployment to fix. MMT response? That was oil shocks and Nixon's price controls. Mainstream response? That's always the excuse. There's always a special reason. Critique 2. The political reality. Mainstream economists say, even if MMT is technically correct about monetary mechanics, it ignores political reality. The problem, MMT says spend freely until inflation appears, then stop. Reality, what government has ever voluntarily stopped spending? Example, the political trap. Imagine a government following MMT. Spends massively on popular programs, healthcare, education. People love it. Government gets reelected. Inflation starts appearing. MMT says, time to cut spending or raise taxes. Government faces, cut popular programs or raise taxes before an election? What happens? They keep spending. Inflation accelerates. By the time they act, crisis. Critique 3. The Zimbabwe question. If MMT is right, why did Zimbabwe suffer hyperinflation? Zimbabwe had its own currency. It printed money. MMT logic suggests this should have been fine. What happened? 2008. Inflation hit 89.7 sextillion%. A loaf of bread cost 35 million Zimbabwe dollars. Currency became worthless. MMT response? Zimbabwe had supply-side collapse. They destroyed agricultural production. No amount of money fixes real production problems. Mainstream response? Exactly. That's the point. MMT assumes unlimited productive capacity. In reality, you hit constraints fast. Critique 4. The Weimar Germany precedent.
1920s Germany. Massive war debts. Decided to print money. Wheelbarrows of cash for a loaf of bread. Destroyed the middle class. Created conditions for Hitler's rise. MMT response: Germany had debt in foreign currency and war reparations. Not comparable. Mainstream response: you always have excuses why historical disasters don't count. Critique 5. Exchange rates and international trade. Mainstream economists warn if the US printed trillions following MMT, dollar value would
collapse. Imports become expensive. This is inflation. Imported inflation. International trust in dollar destroyed. Real consequence: loss of reserve currency status. Then MMT doesn't work anymore because you can't print for international obligations. Critique 6. The allocation problem. Mainstream view. Even if government can print money, who decides where it goes? Free market allocates resources through prices. Government allocation is political and inefficient. History shows central planning fails. MMT gives government unlimited power to direct resources. That's not just economically risky, it's politically dangerous. Let's be honest, both sides have valid points. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. What MMT gets right: 1. The mechanics of money creation. MMT is correct that currency-issuing governments create money when they spend. This is fundamentally different from household finances. Taxes do more than just fund spending. They create demand for currency and control inflation. This part isn't controversial among experts. It's modern accounting reality. 2. Deficit hysteria is often overblown. The panic about deficits in 2009 to 2015 was wrong. Predicted inflation never came. Interest rates stayed low. Economic recovery needed more spending, not less. MMT was right. Austerity during recessions makes things worse. 3. Unemployment is partially a policy choice. If resources exist, workers, materials, governments could employ people. The question is whether the benefits exceed the costs. What MMT gets wrong, or oversimplifies: 1. Inflation control isn't simple. Problems with just watch inflation. Inflation expectations matter. Once people expect it, it's self-fulfilling. Different types of inflation require different responses. Political will to stop spending is unreliable. Asset price inflation versus consumer inflation. Which do you watch? 2. Political economy is everything. MMT assumes rational policy adjustment. Real governments respond to lobbying, face electoral pressures, are subject to corruption, rarely cut popular programs. Giving government unlimited spending power without hard constraints is naive about human nature. 3. International constraints matter. MMT works best for large, diversified economies: US, EU, Japan. Reserve currency holders, countries with deep financial markets. MMT doesn't work well for small, open economies dependent on imports, countries with weak institutions, nations without international trust. 4. Productive capacity is the real constraint. MMT says money is just a coordination tool. The real resources matter. This is true, but you don't know where productive capacity limits are until you hit them, and hitting them suddenly causes crisis. The real lesson: MMT is partially a semantic debate. Traditional economists say debt limits spending. MMT says inflation limits spending. But both agree there are limits. The question is where those limits are and how to identify them. Let's look at countries that have experimented with MMT-adjacent policies. Case 1. Japan, the accidental MMT laboratory. What they did: ran deficits for 30 years. Bank of Japan bought government debt. Money printing on massive scale. Debt to GDP, 236%. MMT prediction: should be fine if inflation stays low. Result: mostly correct. No crisis, low interest rates,
stable currency. But also no growth, aging population problems, zombie companies. Lesson: MMT prevents crisis but doesn't guarantee prosperity. Japan avoided disaster but didn't achieve dynamism. Case 2. Argentina, the cautionary tale. What they did: heavy government spending, central bank financing, ignored inflation signals. Result: inflation hit 140%, 2023. Currency collapsed. Economic crisis. Poverty increased. MMT response: they had foreign currency debt and supply problems. Critics' response: MMT always has excuses. Lesson: political discipline matters. Without it, MMT-style policies lead to disaster. Case 3. The United States, 2020 to 2021. The Great Experiment: $5 trillion in COVID relief, direct payments to citizens, unemployment benefits, business support. Immediate result: fastest recession recovery in history. Household savings increased. Economy rebounded. Delayed result: inflation hit 9% in 2022. Took aggressive rate hikes to control. Debate continues. Was inflation worth the fast recovery? MMT perspective: proved government spending works. Inflation was temporary. Traditional perspective: proved that excessive spending causes inflation. Truth: both are partially right. The spending worked for recovery, but there were inflationary consequences. Case 4. Turkey, the ongoing disaster. What Erdogan did, 2018 present: forced central bank to keep rates low, heavy government spending, printed money despite inflation. Result: inflation over 60%. Currency lost 80% of value. Economic instability. Citizens switching to dollars. Lesson: you can't just print money and ignore inflation. Credibility matters. So what happens next? Is MMT the future of economics? Scenario 1. MMT goes mainstream. Probability: 30%. How it happens: major recession hits. Traditional policy exhausted. Rates already low. Government adopts explicit MMT framework. Works well initially. Other countries follow. Consequences: massive infrastructure investments. Universal basic services. Climate action accelerated. Economic growth boost. Risk: eventually, inflation. Then the question: can politics handle the required spending cuts? Scenario 2. MMT discredited. Probability: 40%. How it happens: country explicitly adopts MMT. Inflation appears quickly. Government can't/won't adjust. Economic crisis ensues. MMT blamed. Abandoned. Consequences: return to traditional fiscal conservatism. Austerity becomes dominant again. Social programs face cuts. We tried MMT and it failed, becomes conventional wisdom. Scenario 3. Selective adoption. Probability: 30%. Most likely outcome: no country fully adopts MMT label, but policies shift MMT-ward. Less deficit obsession. More focus on unemployment and growth. Inflation targeting remains, called pragmatic policy, not MMT. This is already happening. Post-COVID spending broke taboos. Pay-fors less emphasized. Industrial policy returns. Infrastructure spending normalized. The political dimension. MMT appeals to progressives wanting social programs, populists wanting infrastructure spending, anyone frustrated with austerity. MMT opposed by fiscal conservatives, inflation hawks, those worried about government power, most mainstream economists. The election implications. Future candidates might run on "we can afford Medicare for all," MMT influenced. Green New Deal is affordable, MMT influenced. Job guarantee for everyone, directly from MMT. Or opponents run on MMT will create hyperinflation. Fiscal responsibility matters. Don't let government print unlimited money. The climate connection. MMT's biggest impact might be climate policy. Traditional view. Climate action costs too much. MMT view. If we have workers and resources, we can afford it. The planet is the constraint, not money. This reframing is powerful. If MMT gains traction, climate skepticism shifts from "we can't afford it" to defending why we shouldn't act. After examining everything, what's the final answer? Modern monetary theory is correct about money mechanics, right that deficit panic is often overblown, accurate that unemployment is partially a choice, naive about political constraints, oversimplified about inflation control, too dismissive of international constraints. The honest assessment? MMT is neither pure revolution nor complete illusion. It's a lens that reveals certain truths while obscuring others. What MMT really represents? Not a new economic theory, but a different framing of existing mechanisms. It's asking, what if we stopped pretending constraints exist that don't? The dangerous seduction. MMT is appealing because it says you can have nice things without hard trade-offs. The reality? Trade-offs always exist, not from running out of money, but from limited real resources, inflation risks, political economy problems, international complications, unintended consequences. Who's right in the debate? MMT advocates are right that we've been overly constrained by deficit mythology. We could do more. MMT critics are right that unlimited printing has consequences. Political economy matters. History shows dangers. The synthesis? Smart policy lies between MMT and traditional economics. Don't obsess over deficits during recessions, MMT insight, but maintain fiscal discipline over long-term, traditional insight. Use government spending for productive investment, MMT, but watch inflation carefully and adjust quickly, traditional. Recognize money creation realities, MMT, but respect real resource constraints, traditional. The fundamental question MMT forces us to ask, what is money actually for? Is it a scarce resource we must conserve, traditional view, a tool for coordinating real resources, MMT view? Answer: both, depending on context. Final thought. MMT isn't wrong that we could do more. We probably could, but could doesn't mean should, and possibility doesn't guarantee good outcomes. The real revolution isn't MMT itself. It's the conversation MMT forces. What are the real constraints? Who benefits from claiming false constraints? How should we prioritize society's resources? These are political questions, not just economic ones. And maybe that's MMT's real contribution, revealing that many economic constraints are actually political choices in disguise. Whether that revelation leads to progress or disaster depends entirely on what we do with it.